The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer. St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on The Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.
There was little doubt among Missouri's political universe that Todd Richardson would become Speaker of the House. Most expected him to take on that role in January 2017, but Richardson's political plans changed dramatically after House Speaker John Deal resigned at the end of the 2015 session. House Republicans picked Richardson to be their new leader, and his big priority was improving his chamber's reputation.
I don't think the last 5 months have put the legislature and this public institution in a particularly good light. And it's my great hope that we can get back to work and focusing on improving that public perception.
Flash forward to 2018, and Richardson is in his final year before term limits kick in. He decided against running for state auditor this year to focus on the legislative session at hand, and it's unknown if Richardson will ever run for elected office in the future. Senate Republicans and legislative Democrats didn't embrace all of Richardson's agenda, but many lawmakers, including Speaker-elect Elijah Haar of Springfield, felt that Richardson succeeded in setting a good tone in the Missouri General Assembly's lower chamber.
He is one of the unique individuals that inspires respect on both sides of the aisle and in all parts of the caucus, whether you're part of the apple pie caucus or the conservative caucus. He is well-liked. People trust him and believe in him. And so I think his capabilities are such that he will be in the political sphere at some place. And I don't know if that is a 2020 statewide campaign. There's always the possibility that if the Attorney General were to be successful in the Senate campaign, Todd's obviously a very successful attorney and would make a great appointee to that position. Todd will be back in the political space at some point. He's just too talented not to be.
On this edition of Politically Speaking, Richardson joins me to talk about the year ahead in the Missouri House. The Poplar Bluff Republican also reflects on public service and much more. So let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, a candid conversation with the Show Me State's biggest political newsmakers.
I'm Jason Rosenbaum.
And I'm Joe Manis.
That's Eric Greitens, Navy SEALs running for governor, and I'm really, really glad to be on with you, Jason and Joe.
I'm going to push back on these regulators.
I'm doing this for the people.
I was encouraged along the way, not just by my family, but by a lot of teachers and professors, and knew when I was in college that I would run for office someday.
We're very excited about the prospect of having some more free market solutions.
Even though after the conversation, I still might not agree.
We want our listeners to get a real sense of what drives these people.
They're actually people with a story to tell. And welcome to the Politically Speaking podcast, the only show about Missouri politics that firmly believes that both Tyler and Greg Hansborough belong in the Hall of Famous Missourians.
We need to work on that.
We do need to work on that. I'm your host today, Jason Rosenbaum, a political reporter for St. Louis Public Radio. The voice you just heard is Poplar Bluff legend and Speaker of the Missouri House,
Todd Richardson.
And also probably a friend of the Hansboroughs. As I probably said on a previous show, Greg Hansborough, who is the brother of famous basketball player Tyler Hansborough, was actually a friend of mine in college. So that is my tenuous relationship with Poplar Bluff, Missouri.
Everywhere you look, you'll find a connection to Poplar Bluff somewhere. But certainly everybody in Poplar Bluff is very proud of the Hansboroughs, and a lot of people in North Carolina are proud of them too. So
yeah, very much so. So I want to get the political stuff out of the way. Sure. You made news at the end of 2017 when you announced you were not going to run for state auditor. I don't think you had ever officially announced, but people kind of thought that you were going to run for statewide office. First of all, I take it you're at peace with that decision because not running for statewide office is obviously you don't get a chance to move up, but you probably have a lot more time to not only deal with your job at hand, but also just spending more time with your family and enjoying life. Is that fair to say?
Oh, I think it is fair to say. And look, the decision, I love public service, and it's the thing that drove me to run for the State House in 2010 was a belief that good people in public office make a difference. And so the opportunity to continue that service in statewide office was attractive. But at the end of the day, as I looked at the things that were most important to me over the next year, it was really finishing this job and doing it the way that I wanted to do it. So the opportunity to focus on the legislative session and the end of my time here in the House is something I'm looking forward to.
The interesting thing is when I was talking with people about your decision, there was really no ulterior motive or secret scandal attached to it. It just was basically like you just didn't want to put the energy and effort it took to run for statewide office when you wanted to focus on like your last year. Is that fair to say?
It's a huge commitment. Running for statewide office is a huge commitment of time and energy. And I don't think there's any question that it would have taken away from my ability to do some of the things in my final session that I wanted to do. And really the decision was as simple as that. And it's an important office, state auditor, and I know we're going to have some great Republican candidates that are going to be running for it, and I know they're going to put the time and energy that job's going to demand into it. But this gives me the chance to focus on this job.
This is a basic question. I know people in the Missouri political world probably already know a lot of this information, but for people that are listening for the first time that want a sense of what it's like to hold this position, I want to get you to have a couple minutes to explain that.
Well, I don't know if I could do it all in a couple of minutes,
Maybe
Jason, but we'll give it a try. Listen, the job of Speaker, starts and ends with the job of trying to manage the session as it goes on. And for example, this year we started the session on day one with 850 bills that had been pre-filed. So a big part of the responsibility that I have is to make sure that those bills get referred in a timely manner, decide what gets referred and what doesn't, and which committees they go to. And that takes an enormous amount of time in addition to the time we spend obviously out on the floor and doing the things that are more public in nature. But there's a big administrative side of the job of being the Speaker of the House too, and you're responsible for overseeing a large number of employees, making sure that the other members of the House have what they need to be successful. At the end of the day, I've always viewed the job of Speaker as trying to create the kind of environment where the good men and women who come to Jefferson City can be successful. It takes a lot of work to get that job done.
Well, you actually became Speaker kind of unexpectedly. There was a lot of expectation that you would be Speaker in 2017 and 2018. But because John Deal resigned at the end of the 2015 session, that meant an entire extra year of your life was devoted to this job. Beyond just asking how that affected how you did things, I do want to ask, since you started and since one of your main objectives was improving not only the reputation but the operations of the House post-deal, do you think you've succeeded in that? And if so, how do you think things have gone since that very frantic last days of session in 2015?
I think we've made tremendous improvements to the way the building and the culture here in this building is not only perceived, but in fact is. It was a big mission of mine to try to make that happen. And we had a lot of support and help from the rest of the members of the House in accomplishing that mission. I don't think it's a mission that's ever finished. I think this is a place where you've got to be looking to constantly improve, and we will continue to make those efforts over the next year. But I think if you look at the Capitol today compared to where it was back in 2015, I think we've made tremendous improvements, and I'm proud of those.
So on the sexual harassment front, one of the first things that you did, and this was long before the discussion entered into the national consciousness, was you tasked major policy changes within the House when dealing with sexual harassment. I'd like you to detail some of that and also add if you want to do anything more before you leave at the end of 2018.
We started with a group of legislators, human resource officers, and what we did was ask them to do a review top to bottom of our intern policy, our sexual harassment policy, and make some recommendations back on the changes. And we sought a tremendous amount of input from all over the state, from higher education institutions. The Women's Foundation, Kansas City, was a tremendous partner. And what we did, I think, is impose what is really a policy that is as good as any you'll find anywhere in the country, and certainly in any state house. And that starts with having a robust requirement of mandated reporters. People are required to report sexual harassment when they see it. Starts with training for all of our members and all of our staff on a regular basis, and making sure we have a fair process to deal with complaints when they happen. And so that process, I think, has proved to be very, very successful. But we're constantly reviewing it and looking for ways to improve it. And we've made some of those changes along the way.
Do you think that actually these policies need to be put into statute? Because actually Illinois, I think, is considering putting changes in statute.
Ours are in place by House rules, so they are requirements. So I wouldn't be opposed to doing them by statute, but our rules I think are robust enough that they make them requirements.
Well, let's roll into some of the issues and to transition more smoothly. Let's talk about overhauling ethics laws. I know that's been a priority of yours since the beginning. One of the things that you want to try again is curtailing free lobbyist meals, entertainment, and travel. You've often passed bills doing that very quickly, only for them to be thrown into the Senate pit of doom, so to speak. There's a lot of opposition to that in the Senate. I think people have various reasons for that.
Sure.
What's kind of your expectations on that issue? Because, I've been reporting on this proposal since I started reporting, and there's always a lot of talk about banning these freebies, but there's never any action.
Yeah, I'm always optimistic at the beginning of session, and I'm optimistic on this issue again this year. The House is going to make it once again an early priority. And I'm hopeful that the Senate will be able to find a path to get something in this space across the finish line. But I think even if they're not able to do that, having the conversation about this issue is important. And if you look at the number of lobbyist gifts that are being taken today compared to where they were, say, 5 or 6 years ago, there's been a pretty dramatic reduction in them. And so I think there ought to be an outright ban on all the gifts, and I think it's one of those things that's important to how the public perceives what we do in this building. I don't think that we have men and women in this building that are doing things because someone bought them a free meal, but I do think it speaks to the level of the public's trust and confidence in what we do here, which is important. So to that extent, we'll keep talking. To the extent that improves it, we're going to continue to talk about it.
The other ethical area that both Republicans and Democrats have talked to me about in the interim is kind of the fallout from Amendment 2. Yeah. I have to be candid here. I have not found a single Republican or Democrat who feels that amendment is working. It is very easy to get around it through either political action committees or 501c4s. It's even possible for somebody to go to a fundraiser for a PAC and say, give $1 million to this PAC, and then that PAC could hypothetically help them. There's the entire question of local candidates being able to raise unlimited amounts of money. And it's even easy for those types of candidates to donate that money to a 501c4. So my question is, I know that there's a lot of opposition among Republicans to campaign donation limits. That's probably why Amendment 2 happened in the first place. But given that they're in the Constitution for now, do you think that there is going to be any interest among the Republican majority of actually fixing some of the deficiencies? And when I talk about deficiencies, capping local candidates, making it harder to coordinate with PACs, and maybe making it more difficult to donate to 501c4s. What's kind of your thoughts on all of those possibilities?
Well, I think you start from a standpoint that no campaign finance system is perfect, and I don't think the system we had prior to Amendment 2 was perfect. I certainly think there are a number of problems that exist with the application of Amendment 2, and we're going to struggle. Candidates are going to struggle with that throughout the 2018 cycle. We have members who have filed bills. I do think there is an appetite to try to clarify and to clean up some of the places where there's some uncertainty there, and to try to get the best system of campaign finance that we can have, understanding that no system is going to be perfect.
Any particular ones you think might get traction?
I think the issue of the application to local candidates is one that was of interest last year. It's in my view, a big glaring hole in what we had there. Someone could theoretically say that they're running for the city council, raise money in unlimited contributions, and then there's no problem with them converting that money to another race.
I think that the Ethics Commission says they can't roll it over to a state, but as I mentioned, they could donate to a 501c4, or they could run independent expenditures for themselves. There are ways to do it. I'm just pointing that out.
And I think the part of the problem is that the Ethics Commission is going to have a very difficult time because there's very little guidance on what does coordination mean, and so how those rules are applied. I think at some point, if those aren't clarified, either by the Ethics Commission or by the courts, the legislature is going to have to step in and provide some clarity.
I remember talking with you in 2012, near the beginning of 2013 session, about 501c4s and showcasing who donates to them. That type of legislation, I don't think never materialized. I think there was difficulty in the fact that you're talking about a federal tax system, and that you may need federal legislation. But obviously, with the governor's 501c4, and frankly, with 501c4s getting involved in ballot initiatives like the minimum wage fight, kind of on the left, there does seem to be some appetite to reveal who donates to 501c4s. Given that there's a lot of opposition and there's also a lot of complexity, what do you think about that issue?
I think it's a very difficult issue. When I looked at it in 2012, I found that exact same thing that you're talking about. It's a very complex issue to deal with. And I think there's reason to be concerned about requiring everyone to have to disclose all of their donors. And the example, that we looked at back in 2012 was not just the single interest, 501c4s, but what if you have a broader group that's a 501c4? They have to disclose every single member that donates to the Red Cross if they get involved in a cigarette tax increase, or those kinds of ballot initiatives make that issue very, very tough and complex to do. So I think that has been obviously a big point of conversation in the legislature for the past couple of years, and I think you've seen the level of opposition to requiring those disclosures grow along with the support for doing it.
So I read somewhere that you could be interested in changing the Sunshine Law, primarily because the way it's written now, I think it was written in the 80s or 90s, well before text messaging and even non-types of email became regular things. I'm interested in that because obviously there's been a lot of talk about the Sunshine Law because of the Confide app and the governor's office, but more broadly, it seems to have brought to bear that the Sunshine Law really hasn't kept up with technological advances. So I'm interested to hear if there might be some interest in that, not only because of the fact that it's in the news, but because it might be a necessity at this point.
Yeah, I don't think that the interest there has really anything to do with the recent events. We've had members that have been working on efforts to update the Sunshine Law for a couple of years now, and the reasons are exactly what you said, Jason. That's as technology changes, as the modes of communication change, there's a need to update that law. And so what I've said is I think everyone shares a desire to have an open and transparent government, but we want that Sunshine Law to make sense and to be in a place that people can comply with it, and that the law speaks to modern technological advances. So to that extent, I know we're going to have some members that are going to dig into trying to solve that problem as we move forward in the session.
One thing that became somewhat prominent near the end of 2017 is there's members of the House and Senate that want to cut income taxes.
Yes.
Representative Fitzwater and Senator Eigel have a proposal that would cut the state income tax and raise the gas tax. The thing is, though, the Missouri legislature cut taxes, 3 years ago, and it still hasn't gone completely into effect yet. And I was at the press conference with Senate President Pro Tem Ron Richard yesterday, and he said, quote, he doesn't want to brown back state government, which is a reference to Kansas and how Kansas has had all sorts of problems after they cut taxes. With that as a backdrop, what do you think the prognosis is for cutting taxes this year?
I think the prognosis that on tax reform happening in Missouri is very good. Whether that's a discussion that reaches a conclusion this year or not, I think is an open question. But I think there's a strong appetite in both the House and the Senate to do a broader based tax reform than we did the last time we really looked at taxes, which was, as you said, three years ago. And it means a couple of things. It doesn't just mean cutting taxes, but I do think that that's a good thing. Anytime we can return more of Missourians' tax dollars and put them in their pocket, that's a good thing. But we want to do it responsibly. It's also about simplifying and that tax structure that we have in Missouri and making sure that that it's a fair tax structure. And so I think you're going to see not only the efforts of Senator Eigel and Representative Fitzwater, but the efforts of Senator Koenig and others in the House really taking a hard look at what that tax structure overall in Missouri is going to look like. And I'm pretty optimistic that we'll be able to find some consensus and common ground on where we'd like to go. Whether we can get all of that done in this legislative session, I think, is the open question.
The other tax-related thing that's come to pass is the low-income housing tax credit, which we've been talking about kind of incessantly for years. But now that the governor has engineered a situation where there are no low-income housing tax credits on the state level being issued in 2018, he has a lot of leverage. He can basically be like, well, I control this board. I'm going to keep it at zero until you all change the program. He's holding all the cards right now. So I know that this is a tough issue because there are really strong arguments on both sides of keeping the low-income housing tax credit the same because it does a legitimate good of providing low-income housing. But the governor and his allies have said this is a really inefficient program and it's kind of beyond repair, so to speak. You have to come up with a completely different idea. I've talked with you a lot about this over the years, but what's kind of your thought on that issue, given that it does seem like the governor has a great deal of leverage to actually instill changes in this program?
Well, I think that is certainly true, and the landscape and sort of the status quo is different on this issue than it was the last several times the legislature has considered it. But I think there's a good opportunity to use this as a time to talk about how to make that program more efficient, to talk about where the appropriate level of spending should be in that kind of program and in the other tax credits we have. You know, we have a system in Missouri right now where we spend over $600 million a year on various tax credit programs. Most of them do some very, very good things. But the legislature needs to ask the question of how much can we afford to spend on these types of programs given the other priorities we've got. And I think there's a way to find a balance between those two perspectives. And I think there's a way to have a more efficient, perhaps a little leaner, low-income housing tax credit program than we have today, but still be able to take advantage of the good work that those credits allow to happen. So that's what I want to see the legislature looking for towards this year is how do we reform the program? How do we make it more efficient to make sure that those dollars are being spent wisely? And what is the appropriate level that we ought to set the limits for that program at?
And the other aspect of the Eigel-Fitzwater plan is raising the gas tax. And there's a larger gas tax increase that was put forward by a House Senate commission. I've been following issues of transportation probably as long as you have. I think that everyone agrees that the need is there, that the disagreement is how to pay for it. You know, the sales tax increase failed miserably. There's an effort to put a smaller gas tax and didn't go through the House. This one I think would have to go to the people, and I don't know if it'll pass or not, but do you think that there's some momentum to pass something out of the legislature, a tax increase, and have voters vote on it this year?
I'm not sure yet, Jason, whether that appetite exists or not. I think there's always going to be reservations in this Republican majority about raising taxes of any kind. I do think that there is a strong commitment to try to address transportation infrastructure. People recognize that Missouri sits in a very unique spot geographically. We're at the confluence of a lot of rail, rivers, and roads here in Missouri, and they're big, important parts to our economy. But we're going to have to wrestle with what is our long-term answer to transportation funding. Now, the gas tax structure has been around for a long time. It's been a reliable structure for funding Missouri roads. And so the question is, are we going to continue with that type of structure? And if so, what does that rate need to be? I do think that conversation as part of broader tax reform has a whole lot more likelihood of success than it does standing
alone. So if someone just put forth a bill that raises the gas tax by 10 cents, but it doesn't couple it with income tax reductions, it's probably not going to have as good of a chance.
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, this might be a question, an issue that may seem out of left field, but one thing that I've noticed from talking with
Marcelo Zuna is out of left field now. That's the most important left field
Is
issue.
he on the Cardinals?
He is.
I'm not a Cardinals fan. I'm a White Sox
Jason,
fan.
We need to work on that.
Yeah, I
if
should.
You're going to be broadcasting for St. Louis Public Radio, you've got to know who the Cardinals' new left fielder is.
I should. And honestly, I don't know anybody's on the White Sox right now because my focus now is on the Milwaukee Bucks winning an NBA title with Giannis. But on that note, one thing that I've noticed from talking with some Republicans is there does seem to be some interest in maybe legalizing marijuana for medicinal purposes. I think legalizing it recreationally is going to have a whole lot of opposition for various reasons. But I talked with Representative Jim Neely about this topic at length. There's a ballot initiative that's kind of swirling in the background. I think there's two lines of thoughts. One, that the legislature comes up with its own system. The other is just letting the ballot initiative pass or fail on its own. What's kind of your thought on that? Do you think that the legislature may act in reaction to this ballot initiative, or do you think the ballot initiative may be the way medical marijuana is legal in this state?
I'm not sure which avenue ultimately ends up being the dominant one, but I will say that there has been a dramatic change in the conversation surrounding this issue, even in the 7 years that I've been in the legislature. If you told me when I'd walked in the door that you'd have as many conservative Republicans supporting some type of legalization of marijuana, I wouldn't have believed you. That being said, I believe the legislature is the best place to tackle this issue. As you've seen in other states that have tackled the issues surrounding enforcement, surrounding who it's going to be made available to or who it's legal for, are complex and they change. And so the ability for the legislature to come in to do the hard work to craft a good piece of legislation, and then to have the ability to update that legislation as circumstances arise, I think are really important here. So I think you'll see that issue continue to move forward in the legislature, but I also won't be surprised to see that issue on the ballot, and I certainly wouldn't be surprised to see it be successful on the ballot.
It does seem like there's an interesting coalition between like left of center people and conservatives on this issue.
Where I realized that this issue was in a different place than it had been before, we have a group in Missouri called the Silver-Haired Legislature.
Yeah.
And they're a group of senior citizens.
Doesn't one of your predecessors have that, Jim Crider, or is he not involved with that anymore?
I'm not sure if Speaker Crider's involved in that or not, but I was meeting with them earlier this year, and they were going through they meet in Jefferson City, they debate policy proposals and then present them to us. And they come up with some great ideas and some things that we've acted on. But one of their top 3 priorities this year on their list of things is medical marijuana in Missouri. And that's an interesting point to this sort of strange coalition that develops around this issue.
Last year, the House tried to expand the availability of charter schools. It passed very narrowly, did not get any traction in the Senate. It's very interesting to me, living in St. Louis, that there actually seems to be a consensus among the ruling Democratic power base that charter schools are great. And then the legislative Democratic majority here, and also some Republicans, absolutely detest charter schools. They think that they're parasitic entities that take money and students away from like regular non-charter schools. That seems to be kind of the discourse around that issue, and I think that might be why it didn't get ultimate traction. What's your prognosis this year, given that I don't know if people's minds have radically changed on that issue since last year? How do you think that'll fare?
Education reform is one of the most difficult issues in this building, and it's difficult because people care a lot about education. It's a priority for every member, whether you're on a pro-reform side of the debate or whether you're against some of the reforms. I've always been a big believer that we ought to try to expand educational opportunities for kids that don't have access to a quality education. And we have areas of our state that people don't have that access to a good public education. And in those situations, I think having the ability to have charter schools, high-performing charter schools with the right accountability metrics in them makes sense. I've had the chance to tour some charter schools in St. Louis. Not every charter school is great. They have bad apples too. But the record of success of charter schools, some charter schools, and particularly in St. Louis, is pretty solid. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to move on that issue. again, and I'd really like to see it become an issue that has more bipartisan support than it has today.
I just heard the bell ring, so I'm going to kind of wrap this up a little bit.
We still answer to the bell.
We do answer the bell. I do want to ask, because this has been a big issue in the Senate, a lot of senators are not happy with the way the governor has dealt with the legislature. It seems like members of the Republican caucus in the House seem to be more amenable to what he's doing. As quickly as you can so you're not late to the House. What's your relationship like with the governor, and what advice would you have when dealing with the legislature? Because it seems like there were some growing pains with this entire situation, and I'm interested to hear your perspective on that.
Well, I'm not sure that this situation is particularly unique. I think if you go back and you look at the relationship that governors have had with the legislature, and you look at it in other states, the legislature and the governor oftentimes have disagreements. That's sort of the way our system is set up. I think members of both the House and the Senate, for the disagreements that we've had with the governor on specific issues, it's nice to have somebody in the executive branch that will help us work on these priorities and be able to do it in a way where we don't have to override a veto to accomplish the big things that we want to do. So my hope is that you're going to see this session a better working relationship with the executive and the legislature than we had last session. And I'm optimistic that that's going to happen. But there's going to be disagreements too. There always are. There are disagreements between the House and the Senate. There's disagreements between the House and the governor, and there'll be disagreements between the Senate and the governor. It's just sort of the nature of the system, and that's not all a bad thing.
You could argue that having some disagreements is a good thing because you ultimately get to a better policy outcome. But you could also say that calling out specific senators by name maybe isn't helpful to achieving that. I don't know if he's called out any House members by name yet, but I'm sure if he does, you may have a different reaction to this entire situation.
Yes,
very
I think
much
that's fair to say.
So thank you very much for giving some precious amounts of your time to talking with me. This is the first time I've ever done a podcast in the Speaker's office, which I've been in many times. It's a very beautiful office, by the way.
Thank you.
And for all of our stories, stlpublicradio.org. Follow me on Twitter at @Rosenbaum. And how would people follow you on Twitter, any other parts of the World Wide Web?
At Rep T. Richardson.
With an underscore.
With an underscore.
The underscore is very important.
It is.
And I also just want to add as a parting note that the speaker has some very sharp glasses today. He is obviously trying to emulate Jason Rosenbaum.
I call them my Rosenbaums, so put that on the record.
I am very honored by that. Thank you very much, and so long.
Thanks, Jason.
Stain in the ceiling. Why does it keep saying I don't have to see you right now? I don't have to see you right now.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.